Welcome to the show. I hope you're having a good time. Yeah, good, good. So I'm going to start off with a pretty softball question for you, Jason. Here in Alberta, there hasn't been a lot of solar to date compared to a lot of other places. So a lot of solar is going on in other places of the world, Germany, Arizona, China. But does solar actually work well in the Alberta context?
Absolutely. If you look at Alberta as a solar resource, the solar installation, we are 6th globally in the world. What solar likes is it likes sun, obviously, and it likes cold. And we get a lot of both. So just in comparison, our average sun hours per day in Edmonton are about 5.5. If you look at Medicine Hat, it's about 5.8. If you line that up with Germany's best spot at 4.4, I would say we're a great solar resource. We've got over 700 sites out there. We've been measuring solar since 2007. I started the R&D with NMAX, and we've been measuring it all over Alberta. And consistently, it delivers. We get a great harvest in Alberta. We do have, even our winter harvest has been showing great numbers lately. So it just, again, it depends on the year and everything. But overall, on average, we are a great solar resource, and we're not nearly using it enough.
Okay, and then in terms of, I mean, everybody in the room is a Canadian here, probably thinking about snow 3/4 of the year, either in it or fearing it coming. What about the effect of snow, and is that a big bite out of our solar production?
Yeah, I think the snow does play a part, and I think it's the way you do your design and your modeling. It's really important that you soil properly in Alberta. We have the history. So, for example, what we'll do is we'll allow for no production for 90 to 100 days a year. And we're still seeing great solar harvest. So a year like last year, we had an incredible winter, a lot of sun hours, low snow, the harvest only boosts from there. But, you know, on average, you've got to watch that, because we've had years like back, I think it was 2012 or 2013, we had snow in Edmonton, it got really cold, and it stuck. And all our modules were covered, and they were not producing. So you've got to be careful. We definitely, soiling is very important to take into consideration, but the solar modeling tools to date, I mean, they've got a lot of history, a lot of years of sun hours, and, you know, they average. But what they don't do is take into account if it's not going to produce at that time. So you've got to allow for those snow days. Right.
Right, and that's all about how you're modeling and what you're telling the client they're actually going to create for electricity on an annual basis. Yeah, okay.
Absolutely,
good,
yep.
Good. So Brian, what happens when a system in Alberta makes more electricity than they need to consume themselves? For example, what if I'm at work at noon and my solar system is going gangbuster at noon, making a lot of electricity? Or what if we happen to have a school, for example, as a school board, and the kids are there in the middle of winter, but there's more sunlight in the middle of summer?
Well, I think the first thing to look at is not what happens if, it's a guaranteed what will happen when. I mean, if we have it on home, like you said, we're at work, the sun's shining, getting lots of power. Same as at school, on the weekends, any of your mid buildings. The beauty of all of this, and you covered it on your slide on the technical part, was where you had shown the connection back into the grid. And then one of the key parts in your diagram is when you showed it going through the meter. And under the Microgen Act, they actually set it up where you will get, you know, working with your retailer, and I can't overexpress, you know, working with your retailer, you will get credit for those extra kilowatts you put on. So it's not a case where, oh, I put it back on, it didn't benefit me. No, actually you get a benefit, and the grid basically operates like a big battery. So what you overproduce in the summer really helps in the winter, especially when we get the snow on there. So you're ahead of the game. The pricing will, you know, the credits will depend on the type of or the size of the system, which we'll talk about later, but you will get an economic benefit from it.
Okay. So you're not pushing free electricity onto the grid. Okay. So Jason, in terms of, actually I'm going to go back to Brian on this one. In terms of solar and renewables, in the past they've been really expensive, and now we're hearing that prices are coming down. As a result, there's a lot of residential solar in the United States because the prices came down so far. How is it looking in Alberta? How do our costs in terms of installation costs compare in Alberta to what's going on in more mature markets?
Well, in Alberta, I mean, our costs per kilowatt hour are definitely higher than what we would see in the US. But I think the real exciting thing, and we've even seen this on our own projects that we've built for our own use, that cost per kilowatt hour or per watt on that panel is dropping. We've seen on our own projects, and you've probably seen something similar, where it's been a 25 to 30% drop. And it's getting to the point where the panels no longer dominate the cost. It's your labor to get up on the roof and install. So I think it's really exciting to see that coming down, and it's just helping things. But we are higher, but it is coming down for sure.
Okay. Do you have anything to add on that?
Just to add to that about the cost of solar, in 2007 I first started procuring modules for NMAX, and I would think the first polycrystalline modules I bought were about $7.50 a watt, and then we bought some monocrystalline modules that were $10 a watt. We're we're paying under $1 a watt now, well under $1 a watt. So it just shows that the cost of solar is coming down. And just you look at it, that time frame, it's 10 years. Look at where the cost of solar has gone. It's incredible. So it's getting more and more economical. It's getting better. I do agree the labor is your biggest variable and your biggest expense at this point. So, efficiencies, that's what we got to work on now. So.
And by efficiency, you mean the efficiency of the operations rather than the modules per se?
Just the efficiency of the installation, trying to make it so that these, you got less SKUs, less tools on a roof. They can be installing at a quicker rate, that way. So, you can get, you look at a company like Solar City that's in California. They're leading the drive. They're huge. Largest, I think they're still the largest in North America. And they'll go out and put 3 5-kilowatt residential systems in a day. And it's just because they have their guys. It's streamlined, it's efficient. They've got their products, they stick with certain products, and they stick with them and train everybody on them. And I think that's what we just got to do, right? There's a lot of options in the industry, but that doesn't mean that those options are always the best for the installer. Right? So.
Good. Yeah. And even talking on the efficiency, and we're seeing this ourselves, it's also the efficiency in the panels. When we look at what we built at one of our sites where we had panels that were roughly 1 meter wide by 2 meters tall, we were getting ballpark 250 watts. While the latest panels we're buying are 400 watts for that same surface area. So for that same, call it man hour, to handle that panel, I'm getting about 30% more production, energy production out of that also. So it's definitely the work method efficiencies, but we're also seeing it even on the panels to help with that.
And of course, then for the same scale of system, say you're putting in a 10 kilowatt system, you've got less modules to sling, you got less bolts, you've got less lengths of conduit, et cetera. Okay, good. Do you want to maybe make a statement? I know some people here would be thinking purely residential. Other people in the audience might be thinking about a commercial application, and some people might be thinking about a ground mount application. Can you kind of give some ballparks on what kind of cost? Now, every roof, every piece of land is going to be different. When we talk about average prices in the US, for example, commercial, I think the average price for first quarter 2017 was about $1.50 per watt was the average price. But of course, that's across 51 states. That was rooftop. That's 51 states. There's a whole bunch of variation. There's a whole bunch of different buildings. So, not asking you guys to give anybody a quote on the fly here, but just kind of a ballpark. Are we talking $3 a watt? Are we talking $2 a watt? Are we talking sub $1 a watt when we talk about residential versus commercial flat roof versus ground mount?
Yeah,
I'll let you start.
Yeah, you bet. So residentially, yeah, I'm happy to share that with you that we've got, it's roughly over 500 sites, and our average ticket on those sites right now is averaging between $2.50 to $2.75 a watt. Now, it just depends on the installation and the home and all those things, like wire routing, the service, the panel in the home. Does it need a pony panel? Does it need to be upgraded? Those things. And hip roofs, sort of things like that. That's where you're going to find the variable. Flush mount solar is by far the least expensive solar to install. Commercially, Buildings like the LRC, Leduc Rec Center, that is the most economical way to install solar. You're installing it on a roof that's a standing seam roof, you're clamping it to the standing seam, and your rails go in. Very quick, very inexpensive, costs are lower, and you look at a project like that, you're gonna be down around $1.50 to $1.60 a watt. And then ballasted systems are a little more pricey because you got more labor. You're moving ballasted blocks around. You're laying out this array. You've got to be careful with your inter-row spacing, all that. So you're moving ballasted blocks, and you tend to find that gets pushing up more to the $2 a watt range, right? So, or even can be more than that depending on the size of the system. Obviously, the larger the system, the lower the cost per watt starts to go. Ground mount, we're finding, oh gosh, if it's a scalable ground mount, we can get it down to, you know, $2.80 a watt, as high as $3.25, and it can even go as high as $4. Again, it depends what you're doing with that, right? Are you ballasting it? Are you using screw piles, driven piles? There's all these variables with ground mount. Ground mount's a little bit of a complicated animal. The one benefit you have with ground mount is just with the current codes is you don't need rodent protection for ground mount systems. And what that means is in the code, if you put it in rooftop systems, you got to protect that system from rodents, especially if it can't fail to under 80 volts DC. So generally, you're putting all this extra stuff on roofs, where ground mounts, you don't need to do that. So you can use a string inverter, for example, which is less expensive, and put it in. Where on a rooftop system, you'd have to use a system with an optimizer, or you'd have to put all this stuff in to stop a rodent from going through in there. So, you know, there's variables all over. Sometimes it just depends on the site. Like I say, like a site like Leduc, where you have great access, you can go right out on the roof and work every day, it's great. Where you look at a site like Camrose, where, you know, scaffolding had to be put in all the way up to the roof, there was no good access, you know, that job, labor, man-hour-wise, took longer just for those reasons, right? Access is a huge thing as well.
Yeah, and one of the other things to also look at when you're looking at your roofs is, can your roof handle the loading? You know, so you may find yourself where you're either going to reinforce your roof or choose to spread your panels out more. But either way, it's going to drive your costs up. On the ground mounting side, obviously when it's larger, it's more cheaper per kilowatt. One of the other things we've also been learning on it, because we're looking at our own installations up at Fort Chip, for example, on those places, believe it or not, it's depth of frost that gets us, because we're worried about frost jacking on those piles, lifting that ground mount out of the ground, and us coming back 3 years and going, uh-oh. You know, so if you're down south, where you get maybe 1.2 meters of frost, life is easier. At Fort Chip, we're designing for 4.5 meters. So now we're bringing in heavier equipment for the piles. So yeah, there's definitely the variables like you're getting at. But it's just something you learn. You do not let it discourage you, because this stuff is economically viable. Just learn.
So Jason, we talked a little bit about the initial cost of actually, you know, the CapEx. What about the financials and payback for solar? What have you been seeing? Maybe you'll need to talk a little bit about the different billing regimes that we have in the province. Yeah, I gave it to you. Have fun. Yeah.
Wow. So again, it varies, folks. To be honest, it depends on the cost of what the solar costs to be installed out of the gate, and it depends on where you are. I mean, if you're in NMAX Wire Service territory, you're in ATCO, or you're in Fortis, or wherever. I mean, where we're seeing the best return is where on the trend. It's not just about the commodity side, the retail side. It's about the heaviest variable on the transmission and distribution side. I mean, when you look at the way rates are, you have certain wires that are more fixed demand charge. So you can't, if you lower the consumption, you're not gaining a whole lot here. Where if you look, let's just talk about irrigation pivots, because they're the best, okay? If you look at an irrigation pivot down south on a Fortis rate rider, you look at it, so the farmer is paying this retail rate. Let's use $70 a megawatt hour, 7 cents. Some of them are contracted at that. The variable side of that is fully variable, kilowatt hour. So any time that you consume that energy and you're using it, he's got a gain of 14 cents now. That works really well. A return on that can be under 10 years. Residentially, depending where you are, it could be anywhere from 16 to 21. Commercially, we're finding, depending where you are and how your rates are, anywhere around 15 years. You know, it can be lower, it depends. If you're in a, like we have a rate called a 410, and it's for a larger user, and a lot of the T&D side varies. So if you get into a scalable system, like we've modeled out a 7 megawatt rooftop, and what's happening there is we had a 14 megawatt rooftop modeled out in another area. The T&D savings and the demand savings annually were almost the same as the 14 megawatt, just because of the way the T&D was charged. So that really was something we looked at and went, wow, what an interesting analysis.
Yeah, so when people say, does solar work in Alberta, if they're implying, does it work financially in Alberta, then one of the biggest questions is what territory you are in and what kind of an electrical consumer or user you happen to be and what your rate structures are. Yeah.
For sure. But for me, solar works everywhere. And this is the number one thing I say, is what is your return on investment on the grid-tied power you buy every day of your life? There isn't one. Solar gives you one. It's giving back to you, right? And that's the number one thing you got to consider. You're paying, I call it the mortgage that never goes away. And you keep paying into this. Well, hey, have your own generating asset. Create your own power. I mean, we're seeing production guarantees as long as 30 years now, folks. 30-year production guarantee on modules. That's incredible. You know, look at, if you could lock your retail energy rate in for 30 years and keep that price of energy, would you do it? You probably would, right? So
that gets to hedging. How many of the clients that you're working with in the institutional or commercial realm are actually wanting to lock in long-term now to hedge their price versus what is our average price now in Alberta? Pool price is around 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Are you getting much pick up right now on that idea of being able to hedge for the future?
No, we're not. Yeah, back in 2010, 2011, 2012, hedging was a good bet because just where we were with our power, our pool price, everything like that. Now it's, we're not seeing as much hedging at all. We're seeing customers just, going on a load following or some sort of contract that would, where they can, it's basically spot price plus a certain margin, and that's what they do. Even with our residential contracts right now, what we'll see is we see a lot of people calling in saying most retailers now will give you the option to go back to the regulated rate or stick with your contracted rate. And a lot of customers are deciding to go back to the floating rate because of our low pool price and energy prices in Alberta right now.
Right.
So.
Okay.
I think there's an exciting opportunity, though, that's here is we know when decarbonization comes into play, power prices are going to go up. The exciting opportunity is now we have time, and when I say we, I mean everybody in this room, has time to learn how the economics work. So that when we do start to see prices go up because of decarbonization, you are knowledgeable and you already know exactly what you're going to ask, and you've probably already built up some of the relationships with the people who might be supplying it. So I think it's actually an exciting opportunity, like I say right now, to prep yourselves to get ahead of the curve.
So I'm going to give it to Brian here, just to make it complicated as to who's holding the microphone. Yeah, that's good. So just a follow-up as well is without going into all the different billing structures, we could definitely talk about the microgen. I know there's a couple of different cutoffs. Would you mind speaking to that and what the implications of that are to the person who actually has the solar system?
Yeah, for sure. On the microgen, there's two parts. There's one where it's targeted more to the residential person, and they're essentially getting retail rate credits. On the commercial side, if you're a small commercial, like say if you're a fire hall and you got a 20 kilowatt array on your roof or something like that, you're still classified as small microgen, and I'll give you a number in a second here what the demarc is, but you're getting the benefits of retail rate savings. When you cross over to 150 kilowatts, at that point in time, you're no longer getting the benefits of retail rates. Your pricing is tracking to power pool prices. Now, you might go power pool prices are pretty low right now. Yeah, except you're getting credit on the time of day, on the 15-minute. And I did some poking around just to see what the impact of time of day is in Alberta and Nova Scotia. I couldn't find it on ASO's website in time for this. But your time of day, at noon, your power could be worth 2.5 times more than what it's worth at midnight. Noon is great. That's when you're belting out the most power. So that's why I say you want to study that, but it could actually be to your benefit on that. When you're typically over 50 kilowatts, there's, depending how you manage your demand charges, which you were already talking about there, you could potentially reduce some of your wires costs on that. But I think the most important thing, though, is size your system to what you're going to consume. Do not size your system to deliberately be a net exporter over a year on that. Size it for your needs.
Okay, thanks.
Just to speak to that one,
Go ahead.
I just want to add something. Just the spot pricing when you get over 150 kilowatts. I can tell you a great story. We had a customer that we completed the project late May, activated it, got them online, and they were on the pool price. Well, the pool price went to $120 a megawatt hour in June, and the community center wasn't doing anything, so they were getting that kind of value, 12 cents a kilowatt hour for their export, so they made away like bandits. So sometimes it can work out. The pool can be better, than your fix. So it's just, we're in an interesting time right now with the pool price, but it can reach higher and higher numbers. So.
Okay, so back to you, seeing as you've got it, Jason. In terms of limits on what you're legally allowed to do within the microgen, because I think almost everybody in the room here is not wanting to go and build a 6 megawatt project. We're probably talking 5 megawatts or smaller. Walk us a little bit through the nuances of what you're allowed to put on your property and what you're not allowed to in terms of size. And also, there's some new regulations around sharing that electricity between properties you happen to own, which might be important for some groups in this room as well.
Yeah, so the rule is, and Brian spoke to it, is and you did earlier, let's be clear on the size. It's 5 megawatts AC, not DC. So that you can put in quite a lot of solar on that.
So 5 megawatts AC versus DC. Maybe unpack that and then keep going.
What do you want me to?
Oh, sure, I'll do it.
What would that relate to in a DC side?
No, it's just that the DC is the size that you often buy it at.
Yeah, the
But then
DC
after
is your
you-
size that, so if you buy a 5 kilowatt system, industry talks about DC. With that, you divide that by probably 1.25, that's your AC rating, usually is what we divide it by. We're getting deep, a little deep, but maybe not. And so that's what we say. So basically the microgen rule, as you touched on, you cannot produce more than you consume. Okay, so basically that's where the modeling comes out, and that's where it's very important. So the first thing we ask for at NMAX is, I need a year's or 2 of your consumption. Either your utility bills, we fill out a load request form, whatever, and we look at it and we model and we look at the trend of your power usage. Then what we do is we right size the solar to that, your consumption. And again, soiling plays into that, because if you don't soil properly, you may not achieve that net zero electrically goal that they're trying to get, okay? Some cases, we can't get enough roof for solar to offset 100%. So we right size the solar so that they mostly will consume and they may export. The only way you can really tell if you're gonna export is if you have an interval meter and you can lay the hourly solar production over the hourly consumption. And then you can see if you can export. For example, I had a bet with our wires guys about Leduc. I said, there's just no way this facility is going to export. A $10 bet, I thought I had it. He come back and he goes, it's going to export. And they have been exporting, so I lost bad. That's okay, but it's amazing because you know, when you look, I call it the solar curve, the molehill, is when that molehill is at peak, your facility probably won't be using that amount of power at that given time, and you're going to export energy. So, yeah, and as far as, what was the other?
It was sharing between properties.
Oh,
What are the
are you talking
legalities
about the
there?
meter offset or the meter?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so the microgen rule did change, and what we were having difficulty with is, especially in the agricultural sector, is you have farm services, and they could have multiple farm services. But this building's over here, and to tie in behind the meter to all these services, big challenge. So we were all going, would you consider meter offsetting? Like we tie in this meter and we can offset to the loads and size the solar for those other loads. And that was adopted. The other look at it, but there's a lot of things. You have to be on the same utility infrastructure and many things. The other thing that came up with that is a lot of municipalities, street lighting drives them nuts. Right? It's the number one thing that they talk about when I go in right away. What can you do with our street lighting? Well, now we possibly can do something with it, but it's a case-by-case basis and it's not written in stone. So I think that you apply and you may get it through or you may not. But yeah, it's there, and it can be shared. If you've got the roof and another load of yours doesn't, you have the opportunity. The only thing I will tell you with that is you're not, it's challenging because of the T&D side again, right? Because if you're offsetting to that meter, you're not really going to see that reduction, right? So you gotta be careful and find balance in that as well.
All right.
Yeah, there's a key thing that you said that I think is really important to understand, and it was exactly like you said. It was, you're on the same infrastructure. So that means it's the same distribution line that's feeding both of your properties. If they're two different distribution lines, going back to the substation, yeah, it is game over. Because the electrical system will feel it as two complete different installs. If they're on that one line, it feels like one install. So make sure if you're looking at that, check to see is that one distribution line, just so you don't get caught by surprise.
So if we look at some of the efficiencies of scale, for example, if we were looking at a school board, if they had an elementary and a junior high and a senior high all within a few blocks of each other, instead of putting a little solar on each, they could actually put a whole bunch of solar on one, get the economy of scale of doing one larger install, but actually apply that billing-wise to more than one of their assets,
Yep.
right?
That's a good
Yeah.
example.
Okay. Good. So we're going to go to the floor for questions. I just thought I'd give you each one chance to talk about, look in the crystal ball, looking at things that are happening elsewhere in the world. Look in the crystal ball in either short-term or long-term. What's one solar innovation that you could see coming to a province near us?
Well, the biggest one for me that I see everywhere is, I tend to go to the largest show in the world at Solar Power International. I always pay attention to this, and you touched on it. One thing is solar panel efficiency is just getting incredible. Our watts per square foot are coming way up. We are as well putting in a 400-watt module. Means you need less roof, all these things. So efficiency is one thing that's getting better and better. The biggest one for me is we all know this. You can't control the wind, you can't control the sun, you can't control renewables. So the biggest one for me is storage. And if we can control the storage so that it unloads when you're not producing that power, but we're charging a battery bank, and say at night when you usually buy it back, you could unload that storage and help. I mean, that's what the Tesla Powerwall is all about, isn't it? I mean, in California, when they hit it's either 4 or 5 o'clock, their rates go from like 20 cents a kilowatt hour to 33 because they're in that peak zone. So that's what this Tesla Powerwall was developed for in that time period that customer is going to be charged at for it to unload. And it would have enough power to do that for that time period. Biggest challenge with storage is, Dave Dodge touched on it, it's expensive. So do we see the prices of storage coming down? Absolutely. Do we see the control mechanisms that with storage becoming better and better and better? Absolutely. I know of a storage company that's taking islands off diesel-fired generation and taking them to storage with solar arrays. And the VP of business development of this company said to me, he said, Jay, the storage part of it, we can get the battery, we can get the storage, we can make that really work. He said the biggest challenge is making sure you have the controls to know when to use that storage. And he said that was their biggest challenge. So I see the future as storage for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely also, big fan of the storage. And it's not only storage at the individual level or individual facility level, it's storage at the distribution level. if you look at how our distribution system is built, all of those conductors are sized for that one time in winter when we all have our heaters turned on because it's freaking cold out there and we want to stay warm. Which means a lot of times that infrastructure is underutilized. And we see storage, and this is what's really exciting, is when you start doing storage at a distribution level, if you're doing a 10 megawatt hour or a 30 megawatt hour, I can now start to run those distribution lines at a higher utilization factor more. Which means for me, who's paying power bills, I'm going to see a better rate of return on what I see on that wires charge on that. When you also get that in place, it will be a lot easier for the system to support more solar on the end of those distribution lines. You know, so that's the real exciting part. And I know it's coming. And the reason I say I know it's coming is because if you look at what's going on in England right now with the way they've set up the regulatory system, there are companies that are putting in, I think there's one that I know of that's doing 20 megawatt storage units to help offset the wind that's being generated. That is enabling England to go to 50% renewables, which means they beat Germany. So this is the exciting stuff. And when you also look at storage, and this will be the last thing I say, you can tell you hit my sweet spot. Storage on a per kilowatt hour basis for the last 15 years has been on a 7% annual decline rate.
In cost.
So in cost. So what might not work today, it might be only 2 or 3 years away. And today, in remote applications, it is working today. But that's the exciting part. When you get out there, my kids are going to see a lot of solar on their roofs. They better be building it into their house or I'm going to take their engineering degrees away from them. Yeah, I paid tuition, I get to do that. But I think it's going to be really exciting when you get those two things working together.